This
Yeah.
perfect.
Hey everyone, how are you? Glen Ingram here to talk with you a little bit about accessibility. We're very fortunate to have a prominent attorney from New York on to visit with us so we can look and hear, I guess, a little bit about what's going on in the world today of accessibility, those lovely lawsuits we all like to not talk about, and just maybe some tidbits of information. Shirin, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Glenn.
Can you share a little bit with people about your background and kind of who you are?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Shirin Movahed Rakocevic. I'm the founder of Rakocevic Law. We are a boutique virtual law firm focusing on emerging and established brands to help them secure and successfully support their growth and expansion. Everywhere from startup to exit, we've got all your business needs covered. And in this day and age where most brands have an e-commerce platform, definitely we've been kept busy with respect to helping clients navigate the legal issues around website compliance.
So, what are you seeing right now currently in the marketplace with regards to lawsuits, ADA compliance, different laws across the country, and what some customers are maybe being blindsided by?
So, one thing that I think a lot of brands are not really putting in their radar. I mean, it hasn't really been much to talk about until in the last few years, where it's really amped up, is ADA compliance. Before, we've been talking about data breach, data security, privacy. Those have taken the forefront in terms of compliance, website compliance, but now we are seeing a lot more ADA related lawsuits with respect to accessibility. And the lawsuits are really coming from mostly New York and California as a result of the additional supplemental legal legislature that has allowed private right of action with damages in these states. So whether the brand is in that state or is registered to do business in that state is irrelevant. It's where that person with the disability is viewing the website. And so these lawsuits are predominantly being filed in in New York and California. And it all has to do with accessibility. Now, there's a real big gray area with respect to accessibility. The legislature simply states that websites need to provide reasonable accessibility to those with disabilities, and that covers almost 43 million people in the US have a recognized disability. But what does that mean? And those are the questions we try to answer with the help of experts such as yourself, Glenn, that can help us really analyze the accessibility with the website and come into compliance.
Yeah, I know it's been kind of an interesting last 24 months, if you will, ever since the Supreme Court kind of didn't hear the Domino's case and kind of offer their opinion on it. I know we've seen a lot of cases now spring up in Colorado, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Massachusetts. So where you're right, most of the cases have been coming predominantly from New York and California. Florida's had quite a few. It seems like these other districts within the federal court system are really starting to spring up. I know there was one gentleman that sued like 43 businesses last year in Colorado to get that district up and going. Now, I know out here on the West Coast, I'm seeing overlays becoming a target now. Are you seeing that out in California? I'm sorry, out in New York as well? And then we can talk a little bit more about overlays and how most businesses, especially e-com businesses, would like for those to work, but the reality of it is they just don't.
Right. That is absolutely one of the biggest issues that we are also finding. And that, and the other problem is that when we do get hit with a lawsuit, a lot of these businesses are getting what they believe is to be in compliance. And then, of course, something happens a minor change here and there, and then of course they go back into out of compliance. And one of the things that is a big concern is the ongoing issues with maintaining website compliance.
Yeah, that's it's been interesting from my aspect. I know we were contacted by an e-com store out of either actually based in Florida, and they just got hit with their third lawsuit within 18 months, twice in 2021. And the first solution by their provider was to put accessibility on there. That didn't work, so they said, let's go from accessibility to user way. So it's kind of like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. And people are looking for a quick fix when in reality there isn't a quick fix. The only way to make a website work for everyone, regardless of their ability, is at the code level to do it from scratch. And unfortunately, some people don't want to take the time, the expense, what needs to be done to do it right. It's the old adage, there's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it over.
Absolutely. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about what the process is for a client, for example, that let's say preventatively, we want to try to, I know that's something that I try to really encourage is preventative measures. We know that an ounce of protection is worth more in gold than getting yourself in hot water. So can you tell us what that would look like for a company that wants to try to, get ahead of these issues?
Sure. In 9.5, if not 10 out of 10 cases, it's building the website over again because it's time and money. So the way the industry kind of was when we moved into this about 3 years ago, most companies wanted to charge business owners for what's called an audit. So they would go through, find out all the errors that there are in a website, give them this documentation, schedule maybe a 30-minute to an hour call in the next week to go over with whomever was working on the website and turn it over to them and say, these are the problems you need to fix. Well, the problem with that is most people aren't experienced in what's called ARIA HTML or semantic HTML, which are some different types of coding you need to work with screen readers. Screen readers are a software that turns everything on the website audible for people with vision issues. Sometimes people with cognitive issues are going to use a screen reader because it's easier to consume information audibly than it is by reading it. So if you don't understand how to do that coding, you're going to have problems. And so that's what we saw a few years ago was probably 7, if not 8 out of 10 times we would do an audit for someone, send it over to them. They would work with their current relationship, whoever they have for their website, and they would come back not very happy because they weren't able to successfully fulfill what the customer wanted. And now they're paying us to do it over again from scratch. So that's why we predominantly will show them and give them the options and just be upfront and say, it's going to be cheaper, less time for you, for us to build it right. And then, as you mentioned before, to help you maintain it ongoing. Because I've run into different business owners that were sued in 2018, sued again in 2019, sued again in 2020, because they used that older model of taking an audit. Okay, as of today, December 8th, 2021, I'm accessible. Now, the client goes in next week, next month, next quarter, changes images, changes things, and they aren't experts with doing this. And now all of a sudden they have another obstacle they've created for somebody that has a disability. And now these serial litigants are going after them again. It's almost like when you get one lawsuit, you're kind of on the bulletin board, and the other people that are doing it keep checking back. And here comes lawsuit number 2, 3, 4, and so on down the road. So the only way to do it is to work with companies that understand how to code it, how to build it at their original level so that you are accessible and help you maintain it ongoing.
And what would you say is the number, if you could guess, the number of websites that you believe are not in compliance right now?
The company there's been a company that did, they looked at over 1 million websites in 2019, January 2019, July or August of 2019, then again, January of 2020, and 98% of websites are not compliant or accessible. Unfortunately, it's climbing where you think it would be getting better. We went from 97 to 97.5 back to 98% that were not accessible because, again, people are trying to take shortcuts, trying to think that they can do a quick fix instead of taking the time to learn how to do this and do it right, because it is a bit of a learning curve, just to be blatantly honest. Like I said, when we were made aware of this back in 2018, we do hundreds of websites a year, and it still took us probably 6 months to figure this out. So it does take some education, some learning, some training, and changing of your SOPs to do things properly.
So the biggest issue, because I've run into a lot of businesses where they've spent an enormous amount of money building up beautiful websites. And why do you think that the accessibility was not built into these websites that did spend a significant amount of money?
Well, I think the biggest problem is the courts, our government, and our local jurisdictions have done a very poor job of announcing this, talking about the requirements. I hear what I'm assuming you probably hear most also, unless it's a second or third time they've been sued, 9 out of 10 clients that contact us because they are in litigation were not aware that they need to be compliant for this, or thought that their previous developer did it and now they're being sued. So it's A, an education piece, and then B, it's a little bit of a denial. I mean, I know the first time I heard about this back in 2018, and I had an attorney that approached me because their clients were being sued. My first response was, I have to take a visual medium and make it work for someone that can't see. And he said, yes, my clients are being sued. So the internet has been the wild, wild west for the last 2 decades. It's kind of hard for some of the people working it to understand that we have regulations now and we have to do things quite a bit differently than what we had done for years and how our businesses were built.
Right. And I think, to your point, the biggest issue are the regulations, and really what the transparency of those regulations, because even as a lawyer, you go to the ADA, read the ADA legislature, it's not clear what exactly is needed. So it's really hard to, well, of course you can say, yes, you'd have to work with a developer such as yourself to understand what does accessibility mean in the context of a website. But because it's not necessarily spelled out, then that could cause a lot of confusion as to what exactly are the requirements.
Well, yes and no. At least with like the states that have produced their own legislation, and when you look at the case law, everyone has kept the same reference point, WCAG, whatever the current version is of that AA standard. So every court ruling I've seen addresses that. The Unruh Act in California addresses that. So as long as you understand WCAG, which is website content accessibility guidelines, the current versions, the difference between AA and AAA standards, then at least you have a barometer to work within. And when you take a look at 508 laws, which are our accessibility laws with regards to people with government contracts or nonprofits, everything is laid out in there for that. The fact that no one in DC can copy and paste blows my mind, because all I have to do is copy and paste the rules from 508 onto ADA. It may take 2 minutes and this would be finished. And then we would have a lot more defined rules, regulations, if you will, and people wouldn't think it's such a gray area.
Well, what about those that, as you said, brands that thought that they had all the bells and whistles with their developer? Is this something that they could go back to their developer and say, hey, you were supposed to make it as compliant with regulations as possible? Is that something that you've seen or heard?
Yes, I've seen a lot of clients go back to that, and then I'll get a contact or I'll reach out to them and say, just touching base, seeing what's going on. Oh, everything's fine now. They took care of all of our problems. And we take about 2 minutes to show them, no, they haven't fixed your problems. Your site still isn't accessible. Because again, I hate to talk badly about my industry, but I think it's about any industry. People are going to take the path of least resistance, and they're thinking this isn't as big a deal as it is. And in my 20 years of working online, this has been the biggest thing I've seen online with regards to Google websites. I mean, this is bigger, I think, than making sure websites work on cell phones. Because like you said, with the number of people in the US that have a disability, you're looking somewhere between 1 out of 5 and 1 out of 4 people are going to have an obstacle, not going to be able to conduct business with most websites out there. So when you have companies that are charging for marketing, for advertising, for optimization, and we're excluding 20 to 25% of the potential client base, that's a big difference in the bottom line, the revenues for business owners that are depending on these websites to produce revenue.
That's a great point, because that is definitely part of any company's branding and marketing strategy, obviously, is to attract as much customers as possible. When you're already losing a quarter of those simply by not making it accessible, forget the legislature and the other issues. That's poor business decision making, in my opinion. So that's definitely another issue that should be highlighted to these businesses, that don't wait till something happens. Make your business as accessible as possible. I mean, this shouldn't be, my position on this is that it shouldn't be an issue. It should be, let's make our website as we would any other storefront, as accessible as possible for any and all customers. It's part of an anti-discrimination policy, even to provide that, and that should come from the brand itself. It shouldn't come from someone knocking on your door saying you're inaccessible. And that's the unfortunate part. But as you said, knowledge has a lot to do with it, and lack thereof. And it's having these conversations and letting people know that this is a real thing. Accessibility is an issue. And there are a lot of people out there that cannot view your website, cannot, interact with you, and you're losing potential business. In addition to the fact that you are going to be dealing with a potential lawsuit for these issues. So it's definitely on both ends, an expense, but also a potential revenue source to deal with this. And as you mentioned, I think the best rule of thumb is really, if you have a website which wasn't in compliance, chances are there's no point in going back to that original developer, because they really don't know what they're doing to make it compliant. Is that really a fair statement?
I think 100%. I think there's a couple hundred of us that have taken the time to become certified in this internationally, because this is not just a U.S. issue. I think 122 countries signed on a United Nations bill back in the early 90s about accessibility. So now we have state laws. There's laws in Canada. The penalties vary by state. The law kicked in the UK 14 months ago. I think if we hadn't had this little virus going around, we'd have probably seen more litigation in the UK. When the courts were shut down for a couple of months last year, we saw filings. But of course, these attorneys that were doing this were just stacking them up on their desks. We actually still had more lawsuits in 2020 than we did in 2019. And 2021, I think, is going to blow people's minds when they see how many filings we've had. And the only bad part with that, I think, is we're not seeing is there are some other people that have a different model to where they're sending out a lot more letters, settling for a little bit lesser amount that you're probably seeing that isn't even getting on the court's dockets. So we're not even counting those in the potential litigation out there that people are still getting, basically penalized for.
Right. I mean, that's really, unfortunately, one of the issues is those litigators that are taking advantage of this by sending out these mass letters and getting pre-litigation settlements out of this. So we're not hearing about them. We're not seeing the statistics, but definitely a lot of businesses are, if they haven't already been affected, they're definitely going to get affected. So it's not an if, it's a when situation. To get your website into compliance. And you mentioned that there's only about 100 of you that have done the certification. Now, what is required for the certification that makes it so special?
It was an overall thing, because accessibility doesn't just apply to websites. Even though we specialize in web accessibility, it's the entire world. So it was learning accessibility with education and students and physical types of limitations and things like that. So it was really kind of taking a college course back over again and learning different things, as well as different techniques and how they apply to the real world, to websites and things like that, because we're constantly talking to customers that are learning about this, afraid of this, and we're coming across new things where maybe people are looking at their Google Maps and seeing their parking lots using Google Earth and trying to solve a lawsuit, send a letter to threaten them based on their parking lots not having clear paint, not having enough parking lots or enough spaces for disabled people in there. So you kind of have to understand and learn a little bit about all facets of accessibility, because no one's helping our clients, or very few people are helping our clients with that. I know on the West Coast for clients we have, and I'm sure you're seeing it on the East Coast as well, they have a building inspection because they did an addition, they built a new building, or they built something new for a restaurant, for a store, something like that, and they assume that my inspector understands this stuff and don't know that you have to have a specialized inspector that understands accessibility, that can say, yeah, this room is fine, but as soon as you start putting tables in there, chairs, racks, things of that nature, are you still accessible? Do you still have enough room to do all those things? So fortunately for us, we have a company that does that type of stuff that we can refer them to, that knows everything about it, where we know the 50,000 foot overview and transverse. They know the 50,000 foot view of websites, and then they send the people over to us so that we can kind of balance back and forth and help get experts in front of the clients on those specific areas.
That's great. Now, is there a way for a company to do its own sort of audit, just a simple audit to test to see how badly they are out of compliance?
They can do what I would call an assessment, more of an audit. There are tools out there. You have the Wave tool by WebAIM that is very good at about 2 different facets of accessibility. It'll give you the color contrast. It'll give you your heading tags. There's not one tool, unfortunately, that's built out there right now that, well, there's a couple, but they're very expensive, and business owners aren't going to spend tens of thousands of dollars just to use the tool. But for the ones that are available out there to them, you have the WebAIM Wave tool that'll show those 2 facets. You have the Google Lighthouse tool, which is a free tool through Google that you can use in the developer tools. You have accessibility insights for the web. So they all kind of have little niches that they can do, and it'll tell you if you have errors. The nice thing with the Wave tool, when you understand, is you have red, yellow, and green. The red stuff is definitely something that's a problem. You need to fix immediately. And then you have the yellow and the green, because some of these things you have to understand and take a look at it and test it, because it may work, it may not work. That's some of the things when you understand the different types of coding. It may be right to use an ARIA code, or it may be right to use a semantic HTML code. And sometimes it may be a choice depending on the application for the client. So you kind of have to understand how they all work. It's not just a clear-cut way to test it and say, yes, you should be using ARIA here, or you should be using semantic. So at least it would give them a guideline that, yes, there's a problem with that. Anybody can go to WebAIM, hit the Wave tool, put their web address in there, and it'll at least tell them if they have their title structure messed up, or if their color contrast isn't very good, because 9% of guys are colorblind by the time we're 50. So if we can't read the text because there's not enough contrast between the text and the background, we're going to hit that back button and go to the next website.
Wow, that's a very interesting point. And so what would you say, when I'm dealing with this issue, of course, there is an initial time frame to which you can get in compliance, right? 30 days. And is this something that your company can handle in terms of, being able to make a website compliant within 30 days? Is that possible?
It depends on the website. Most informational websites isn't a problem. Where we run into some problems sometimes are for places that are selling things online. So e-commerce type of things, or websites with stores. If you're not worrying about accessibility, a lot of times you'll put every product out there. You'll put 10 or 15 pictures of that product out there and things like that, which is fine. That's the way the businesses have been run for years. But when you have products out there that you need to go through and edit every product, edit every image, edit every page, we've had some times with a jewelry store here a couple of years ago where I had one employee that had 160 hours just working on images. So it just depends on the size of the site. I think we probably work as quickly as anybody else in the industry to make them accessible, but we can only work with the number of hours we have in the day. We haven't found a way to be able to stretch those days out yet. We've tried.
So basically, if you are an e-commerce platform which has a lot of products out there, you definitely don't want to get caught with that time period, because it's most likely not going to happen. So this is a preventative measure that's absolutely necessary in those cases.
Yeah. Could we talk about that a little bit more? Because on the West Coast and in the other states, they don't have that same rule that you're talking about in New York, where if you have received a complaint, if you can make the site accessible within 30 days, that complaint can go away. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, then they can consider that that they've remedied. They have 30 days to remedy, essentially, and they have to show compliance within that 30-day period. So that is something that's definitely on the East Coast for litigants here in New York.
Is this that 30 days began with the day they filed the complaint or the day they received the complaint?
It's from the days that the complaint was filed.
Okay. Yeah, I know we've had some clients out there, so that's been helpful with it. And literally had a client back in August we were working for that was on the West Coast that the day before we launched our new site, they received a lawsuit from New York. So thankfully it was done and fixed within a week, and they were able to pay a couple hours for an attorney to take care of that type of thing. But yeah, timing is imperative, and that was a larger e-com site. So it was just lucky that they had started a couple months prior to that.
So what is something that you can suggest that website owners do to try to, I guess, get a step ahead of any lawsuits that may come their way with respect to compliance?
They need to hire one or talk to one of the few of us out there in the country that are actually doing this. There's a few companies out there. It's easy to kind of find us. I say it's easy to find us. It's also difficult to know when you're looking online who actually knows what they're doing and what they're talking about and who's promoting something that doesn't really work. I think the more you look on these videos on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and see who's actually out there talking about this all the time and who's taking on this type of business, and then contact an attorney like you that does this, because if you work in accessibility, odds are you're going to know someone that works in it. Not contacting their business attorney, not contacting their tax attorney, but literally contacting an attorney that works in accessibility, because we all kind of communicate and develop in networks, kind of like a spider web. Because when my clients are sued, I need attorneys to refer them to. And when your clients are having issues, you need developers to return them to. So it's kind of Googling, looking accessibility, and doing as much due diligence as you can.
This was great. Thank you so much, Glenn. As you said, it is really important to work with people who understand exactly what your issues are. And sometimes it's really hard to filter who's really specializing in this area or not. And especially when it comes to things like this, accessibility, most developers, as we know, do not understand this. And it's best to hire someone that actually does do this and can confirm that it's been done, right? There's ways of confirming that you're accessible and sort of having some sort of relief. Okay. So
yeah, and when we got into this back, like I mentioned, back in 2018, I literally contacted everybody I could find on YouTube, on Google, everywhere that was in this, and tried to talk to them to learn from them. And some people would talk to you, some people wouldn't. I was very, very fortunate that I at least had a few moments of a gentleman over in the Southeast that had done a lot of work in Florida over a couple of years. And we followed their model, which was making sure sites were accessible, helping them maintain it, and doing a quarterly audit. Because when you kind of, again, reference back to 508 federal laws, in 508, every business is supposed to have a compliance officer. Well, you're not going to have a compliance officer. Most e-com stores aren't going to have a compliance officer. It's not realistic for small businesses to do so. So we become their ad hoc compliance officer. So we do quarterly audits. We keep records of these things so we know what was an issue. If some what's called CSS or HTML updates on a website, we go in and make sure that it's accessible. If WCAG updates from 2.2 to 2.3, we go in during that quarter and update to those things. That way, should you, and I'm sure you've seen this, seen lawsuits that were actually websites that were sued that were accessible, then you and I can jump on the phone, contact the plaintiff's attorney, ask what obstacles they encountered going through the audits. And by having a compliance officer that can do that, it was the leading reason why lawsuits have gone away in 2020 and 2021, is someone was working with someone as a compliance officer on their behalf that could help walk them through this when they do receive a complaint.
That's a great point. Thank you so much. That should make a lot of businesses feel a little bit more relief, knowing that if they do work with a company such as yourself, not only will they get into compliance, but they'll stay in compliance. And as you said, if there is a lawsuit, there are ways of verifying that information and confirming compliance so that we can easily file a motion to dismiss. So again, thank you so much, Glenn. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I hope everyone learned a little something about ADA compliance and website accessibility.
Amen. Thank you for taking the time too. It's always good to be able to find an attorney that has experience in this, that knows what's going on, and is giving great advice to their clients to help protect them, because it's always better to be proactive than reactive, especially in this arena.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.